am I bad?
Is
And
this normal?
she goes, no, this is totally normal. She's like, I've seen way worse. And I was like, you've seen way worse? What did it look like? Because my whole page is red. What does it look like if it's worse? And she's like, none of your words would be there. There would just be other words. And I was like, I don't know if that makes you feel better.
Welcome to Side Note, the podcast, where we empower ambitious women with new perspectives. I'm Samantha Fackler, your host. Join me for off-the-cuff conversations with the most authentic people I can find. Entrepreneurs, creatives, authors, visionaries. We welcome you as you are and hope you leave with what you need. This is Side Note, the podcast where big ideas become real. Today, we have a very special guest, a friend of mine, Kendall Berg. She is a career coach. She is a pageant queen. She is actively gunning for Mrs. Colorado. She is a writer. She is so many different things. So welcome to the show, Kendall. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks. No pressure in that intro. I love it. Yes, the multi-passionate for sure.
Yeah, when I think of you, I'm like, you are like this constant Swiss Army knife of a human, and you have so many different things going on. So, update our listeners. What are you up to today? What are your different areas of focus?
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. So if you guys follow me, I'm that career coach on social media. Obviously, I have like the influencer side of that business, all of the content, all the things. But my first book is coming out in the new year around April, May timeframe. So I'm currently in the humbling experience that is editing, which is I thought I understood the English language. I
Nope.
don't, in case you were curious. So that's been really fun. That's like a big avenue right now for me. I do still work a full-time corporate job. So right now is like budget season, which is like our craziest season of the year. So it's a lot right now. And then I am vying for the title of Mrs. Colorado. I have my pageant upcoming in April, but right now I'm doing a lot of nonprofit events, raising money. My platform is based on domestic violence survivors. So I partner with different shelters across the state to raise money, raise awareness, raise resources. So I'm working on that a lot. And then, of course, I have two young kids and I'm married and love my husband. And we're building a house spontaneously. This is a decision
Oh,
like
that's
10
new.
days ago. We weren't going to move. We were going to stay here forever. And then 10 days ago, we were like, we should build a house. What if we just bought a house? So now we're doing that. And not enough sleep. That I guess that's like a good summary of all the things that are happening.
Yeah, I'm tired after listening to that. Okay, so you have about a million things going on, and there's so much I want to dig into, especially with writing, with editing, with the pageant coming up in April. So many different things. I mean, your platform is massive. You're, I think, the only person I know who kind of introduced her business through a viral video. Like immediately you had an audience, and that's definitely something I want to dig into also. But before I start digging into all these different tendrils of your life, um, how on earth do you balance it all?
So the short answer is I have a wonderful husband, right? And I sing his praises all the time because I would not be able to do the million and one things that I love to do if he was not both my rock and my stability, but also that person that was like, hey, you need to work tonight? Great. I'm taking the kids out. Or, hey, you've got an event for the pageant this weekend. That's cool. Me and the kids will go up to the mountains. Like he is my absolute support system. So I'm very, very thankful for him. Without him, none of this is possible. And the second piece that I would say is I have a really high stress threshold. So something that I've learned over the past few years of working two jobs, which was supposed to be like a short-term 6-month thing where I was going to do both. And like it's been 2.5 years and there's no end in sight, is my stress threshold for where I feel uncomfortable is incredibly high. So we could have a whole separate podcast episode on whether or not that's like a trauma response or some type of forced resiliency. But it takes a lot before I start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm like really tired and I really need a break. And so for anybody who's listening, who's like, this chick is insane. How is she doing all these things? I do not recommend this for most people. I want to be
Okay.
really clear on that.
Yeah.
I just have a really high stress threshold and I don't operate very well in stillness. I tend to operate really well when like there's always that next thing. And so for me, I thrive in that chaotic environment. Like I've delivered some of my best work at my corporate job while all of this has been going on. I've like invested more in my body and my health than I have in years. And for me, I really enjoy that kind of chaos. And so I always like to caveat that when this comes up on podcasts is like, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I need to have two jobs and kids and a hobby and wake up at 5 a.m. No, you don't. Feel free to nap and like to have balance in your life. I just operate really well in this space of like a little bit of insanity at all times.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's funny that you're like, I might be in a trauma response all the time. Don't recommend. But taking a step back for a bit, you talked about your husband. And right before we started to go live here, we started talking about marriage and how that changes things. And both of us, we lived with our partners before we got married. So we thought, okay, we'll have this beautiful wedding and then it'll probably be the same. And then we find that it is actually different. Can you share how it was different for you and what, I guess, any learnings from that period of time?
Absolutely. So I am by no means a marriage expert, though I have been married for 11 years and I still like my spouse. So I feel like that's like, I'm pretty happy with it, I'll be honest. Um, so I would say I think it felt different in the beginning because your expectations shift, whether intentionally or unintentionally. My expectations of a husband were different than my expectations of a boyfriend. And my husband's expectations of a wife were different than his expectations of a girlfriend. And we had done premarital counseling and had actually written out contracts of like what our expectations were for our spouse, which I thought was a really fun exercise before we got married. Because I looked at his list and I was like, really? Would not have planned on any of this. And he looked at mine and same vice versa. But I think our
Can you
expectations.
give us an example of one of those?
Yeah. So, like, my expectation for my husband is that he has to be really involved in child rearing. As you can see by my lifestyle, I need support in that. And I'm also just not a very, I hate to use the word warm because that sounds like I'm a terrible mother, but like, I'm just not a very like warm, like, oh, let's bake cookies together kind of mom. That's just not my personality type. I'm very logical. I'm very organized. I'm very like, I will take you to all of your sporting events in order correctly and feed you and keep you clothed. But I don't have that warmth to me. And I needed that balance in my partner. And my husband looked at that and he's like, it's so interesting that this was important enough to you to put on your list. He's like, I would have assumed that I should be really involved. He goes, but it being the number one thing on your list means I need to be way more involved or we're going to have clashes. So that's like an example of something that I had that he was like, it was kind of implied, but for it to be that important to you makes me reframe how I think about that.
Yeah.
And obviously he's stellar at it because here we are. And so I think the biggest things that I've learned, and this applies to all areas of life, if you do follow me, I talk a ton about communication. I think everything in life, success and failure, everything comes down to how do you communicate.
Right.
And my husband and I have really, really good communication now that we didn't quite so much have 11 years ago. Not that we had bad communication, but you're figuring out each person's style. How do they like to receive feedback? How do they like to be praised? How often? And kind of figuring that out, even though we had lived together and we had been communicating for the 18 months, 2 years before we got married, it was very different to then as a spouse where like, hey, no, these are like some of the expectations I have for you. Here's what I need from you. And an example of that is I'm 2000% words of affirmation. I need to know you love me and I need to hear it about 300 times a day. Okay.
The writer
And
in you.
exactly. Like I need, and I'm afraid that I'm doing something wrong. Like I'm afraid that I'm not helping enough. I'm not engaged with the kids enough. I'm not cleaning enough. I'm not, fill in the blank enough.
Mhm.
And I need that reassurance. It's like, no, no, you're good. We're okay. And so when my husband and I first got married, I would set aside my pride to be like, hey, I need you to tell me that like I'm doing a good job. And he would respond jokingly. We're a very sarcastic couple, like, oh yeah, sure, you're doing so great. But it would like hurt me because I'm like, no, really, I need to hear in this moment that I'm doing okay because I feel like I'm not doing okay.
Yeah.
And he very quickly learned like, oh, when she asks, we're already near that like edge and I need to give that to her. And so that was like a quick learning for us. But I would say early on in your marriage, being able to communicate openly about what you need, being able to set your pride aside to ask for what you need, that's a big one. I have really good friends who are like, my husband's not involved. He doesn't help. I'm like, well, Do you
Yeah.
ask? And they're like,
How do you put that
no.
need on the table? Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe we ask, right? And now, if you've asked your husband to do the dishes 32 times and he hasn't done them, that's a totally separate situation. But being able to ask and then being able to accept without criticizing when they give it. I think this is really hard, especially as women step into motherhood. It was for me. Like, hey, can you change the kid's diaper? And then the whole time I'm standing behind him, like, no, not like that. Can you don't move your hand like that? Where's the, can we not like that? And what I learned for me was like, I just had to leave the room. Like, he's going to change the diaper. The child is going to be alive. Their diaper will be clean. Everything will be fine, even if it's not exactly my way. And so being willing to ask for what you need, being willing to let them do it in a
Mhm.
way that still gets you the end result, even if it's not your way. Um, and then having that open communication. So my husband and I still do dates every Friday for lunch. We go out, just the two of us, while my kids are in school, and we talk about our finances, we talk about our jobs, we talk about our home, we talk about our hobbies, we talk about my business, we talk about his job. Like we cover all the topics and we have that one-on-one. And I think that's really important because even with kids, like at some point they're going to grow up and they're going to abandon me and I'm going to have him and I want to still like him and I want him to still like me. So that would be kind of my advice of what I learned really quickly in my marriage was like that communication has got to be there all the time. Because I think that's the first thing that goes is when you can't communicate with your partner.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's funny because we talk about major life events like having a kid, becoming a mother. But marriage is one that people, I think, view as if you haven't been married before, it seems like, okay, you have a big wedding and it's this really sliver, small chapter of your life and then it's over. But actually going through the process, I'm learning, like you're saying, expectations change. And I think that was so wonderfully put. Like your expectations of a husband are different than a boyfriend. For us, we haven't written contracts, but we are doing this book called Eight Dates. I don't know if you've heard about it. Love
Mhm.
it. It basically, you go on a date each week, or we do every other week because we're a bit busy right now. And every date has a theme. So you read this chapter, and there are very intentional questions about different areas of your life. So, how do you view work and money? How do you view communication? Both of you kind of share like your own background with each of these topics. And so it's very bonding and I feel very close to him. And it feels like we're like fortifying this new foundation for our relationship. Now, for yours specifically, he is taking on, you were saying, more child rearing as you do all of these different things. When it comes, I don't like the word superpower because it like makes me nauseous, but what is like a super skill of yours besides this response that keeps you going and keeps you being productive, but like allows you to do all of these different things?
Uh, Time management. That
Okay.
sounds cliche.
No,
I
no.
am
Good.
hyper organized
Okay.
and hyper focused on how my time is managed. And what I mean by that is not just what meetings do I have on my calendar, but when do my meetings start? When do my meetings end? When do I focus on my business? When do I focus on work? And so for me, my superpower is I can fit a lot into a small period of time because of the way that I manage my time. So, like for me, I think everybody's heard of time blocking at this point. It's a very
Mhm.
popular method. Does not
Yeah.
work for me at all. Super great thought. My brain's like ding, 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 and that just does not flow with that.
Yeah.
But day blocking works really well for me. So Mondays are my content days. I make all my social media videos. I record all my podcast episodes, guests or mine. I write all my emails, my LinkedIn posts. Everything happens on Mondays for content. And then I don't think about it for 6 days because I can't. My brain doesn't work that way. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I have clients and I have my corporate job, and they are intense those days. Those are my days, long meetings, lots of talking. I'm an introvert. So then Fridays is when I recover. It's when I spend time with my husband. I still answer emails. I still do my corporate job, but much, much less dense. I only take meetings until noon. The second half of the day is to get caught up on anything for the week. It's when I do my Excel models and all of my stuff that doesn't require people that I love. And then Saturday and Sunday, I do not work ever, no exceptions. Not on the book, not on my business, not on anything. That is my time with my kids. That's when I'm driving them to hockey practice and we're going up to the mountains and we're going hiking and we're doing the family stuff that I need, or when I'm engaging with my friends or doing my nonprofit event. So that's like my recharge time. And then I repeat. So for me, kind of categorizing the things I do by day has been really helpful. Um, I'm very passionate about mental load. So I feel like we all carry a lot of mental load for all the things we have going. And so when you're as busy as I am, your mental load is really high because you're trying to juggle the 52 million things you need to do that you don't want to forget. And
Mhm.
so by having it by day, I don't have to think about this thing except on this day. I don't have to stress about these things on this day because they're for a different day. And once I've done that enough, I've kind of fallen into this really great rhythm with that. And there are ebbs and flows, right? There are days where I don't get to make content till Wednesday because Monday ends up being a crazy day. Like stuff shifts. But for
Right.
the most part, I am pretty strict about like what I do when, and that allows me to not carry as much all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant way to go about it because I also day block. So Mondays for me are admin days where I'm working on my business. Usually no meetings unless I do a podcast episode with someone, because that's the only day they can schedule.
Mhm. Hello.
Um, Tuesdays through Thursdays are my client meeting days. Wednesday afternoons, actually, I have a little bit of recharge time. So that's my time where I go to like the chiropractor and I meditate so that I can carry out the rest of the week. And then Fridays are my like creative days. And I try to inject like a lot of joy and fun into my business so that it feels re-energized. But the mental load piece is crucial because there's no context switching. And I think that's something I'm still trying to dial in with my business because I will have a coaching call and then I want to do this and then XYZ. So blocking it the way that you have makes a lot of sense. I want to tap into something. You said you were an introvert, and that's
Mhm.
the last thing I ever would have guessed. So
I know
what
it's shocking.
what do you do to recharge specifically?
Yeah. So I think most people who follow me, or even people who know me socially, would assume I'm an extrovert. I always joke I'm an introvert by nature and extrovert by force. So I moved 18 times before I graduated high school. I went to a different school every year, and you cannot be an introvert in that environment and survive. Kids are brutal. Okay. So I learned to be extroverted, and I feel very comfortable. I wouldn't say very, I feel somewhat comfortable with my social skills, but I need downtime. So I'm a lover of the gym. I'm one of those six-eightists who like needs the gym to function. Like if I don't work out, I get cranky. And my husband's like, do we need to go to the gym? Do you need to lift? Do you want to have this argument in 3 hours when you get back? Do you want to reassess? Right. So I'm a gym person. That's what clears my, because I can't think about anything except for
Yeah.
how much pain I'm in. And I need that. And nobody talks to me because I put on big headphones. I pretend like I can't see anybody else. It's great. Gym is a big one for me. I do yoga, I lift, I run, I do the Stairmaster, I swim laps, like anything that just disconnects me from other people. And I read a lot. So I'm that person that reads fantasy books or cheesy rom-com books or something that just my brain can shut off except for that. And I do that in the evening. So I spend time with my kids. I take them to their events. They go to bed. I am in that room in my bed reading a book. My husband is watching Walking Dead or uh, Breaking Benjamin or something on TV. Breaking Benjamin is banned. What's the drug show? Anyways, he's watching TV. I'm laying in bed with my book. I'm
Breaking
de-
Bad?
Thank you. Breaking Benjamin. Benjamin's bad. We got there full circle. Breaking Benjamin was just in Colorado, just for the record, and I couldn't go to their concert. I'm still really depressed about it. Separate issue. So, but yeah, so I read a lot. That's my decompression. I exercise. I hike. That's how I disconnect. And my husband knows I'm a talker. I want to get all my thoughts out so that they're not in my head. And then when they run out, I don't want to see anyone for like 3 to 4 business days. Just like completely in
You're
my
mute. You're
alone.
selectively mute.
Yes. And my husband is a genuine extrovert, like loves being
Oh.
around people. If he's energized in a group and it'll be like a Friday night. He's like, what do you want to go do? And I'm like, absolutely nothing. Thank you. Have so much fun. Go away. Love you. And he gets it. We ebb and flow really well. But yeah, I would say I'm an introvert who loves to read and work out just to clear the brain cobwebs away.
Yeah, it makes sense with everything you're doing to the physical piece because one surprising thing starting to work for myself was that I needed to work out.
Mhm.
Like for me, I schedule my Pilates classes towards the end of heavy call days so I can go and clear and be in my body, not carry anyone else's energy with me into the night and just like totally reset. And then books, yes, I mean, I'm a huge reader, also a writer, love it. What are you reading right now that you're obsessed with?
Ooh. So for nonfiction, I have them right here. They're handy. Nonfiction,
Oh,
I'm reading A Crown That Lasts by Demi Tebow, which is about, she was Miss Universe, if you don't know. She married Tim Tebow. She now runs a nonprofit. She had a sister who was special needs, and she is really passionate about that cause. So I'm reading her story of like when she gave up her crown, she felt like she lost her identity, and how did she find her way back to herself? So that's one that I'm reading. And then 100 Things Millionaires Do, which isn't, I wouldn't say like groundbreaking, but it's a good refresher of like things you should be doing financially for your financial health. So those are my two nonfictions right now. And then for fiction, so this is where I read on my phone because I'm out and about and I'm like, I need something to decompress me in public. Right now, I'm reading The Divine and the Cursed is the book, and it's
okay.
about a woman who gets sold into slavery. So triggering potentially, depending on what you're comfortable with. But she's actually like the princess to the kingdom, and the person she gets sold to is the prince of like a warring kingdom.
Ooh,
And their
interesting.
dynamic together is very interesting. So yeah, that's the current read set. But there's in this desk probably like 200 books that are on my
Ah.
list to read that I may or may not ever get to, but I like really like having them handy in case I feel so inclined. But I really want to read Good Energy. And that feels like a book you would like. So if you haven't read it yet, it's on my TBR. I want to read it. It's basically about like big pharma and big food and how it is impacting our health and our humanity. And so that's
Yeah.
next on my list for sure.
Okay, that sounds right up my alley. I need to do that. I actually spent part of this morning on Goodreads. Like, it's one of my, I think it is my favorite social media, saying like what people are reading and then adding things to my list, which my list is absurd at this point. But some background here. Kendall has the best book recs. I started a mastermind a couple years ago that Kendall was in, and I feel like you single-handedly proposed like so many great books to read, like every single time. You're like, oh,
Well,
gotta check out this one.
this is the way my brain works is I don't candidly don't have time to do a lot of trainings, to do a lot of masterminds, to do a lot of certifications. I'm such a huge fan of the people who do them. I have my coach who gives me advice, and I read nonfiction books,
Yeah.
and I read one book a month. And that is like my love language is like, have you read this nonfiction book? Like in your business, if you haven't read Traction, should totally do it. Highly recommend. It was my obsession in Q3. I think I read it twice. But I love just the concepts and like the distilled information and the tactical things that you can go do that come from reading a book. And I like having it handy for references. So I appreciate hearing that. I love books. I have a
Yeah.
whole book TBR on like my Amazon page, and I'm adding to it constantly because every week I'm like, oh, this book looks good. Somebody was telling me the Shoe Dog, the Nike book is like a must read. So that's on my list. I have all kinds of stuff. So
Interesting.
we could talk
Okay.
like 3 days.
Okay. And well, speaking of books, this is a great segue because you are writing a book. It's coming out soon. Editing seems to me like the biggest, I don't know, elephant in the room, maybe when we talk about writing. There's so much focus on creation of the story, the outline, the plot, whatever it is, fiction or nonfiction. And there's so much concentration around like creativity and the writing process. But I feel like the editing process is this thing that's not talked about as often.
Yeah.
So, what does the editing process look like for you right now?
Yeah. So I'm working with a big book publisher. So I think the process is a little different if you're like self-publishing versus big book. One of my closest friends, she wrote a fiction book called The Design of Goodbye. So good if you're into like young adult romance with like some dark undertones. And she self-published in her editing process. And she's a technical writer, so she's very hard on herself. So like every line was read like 52 times. For me, writing the book, I don't want to say it was easy, but I knew what I wanted to talk about. So my entire manuscript was 5 months and 2 weeks from start to finish, like very quick for a
Oh,
full book.
that's very quick.
It's very quick for a full book. but we've been in editing for like 7 months, like it never ends. So I think editing for me for my big book publisher was I sent them my manuscript, they read it, and they sent it back redlined. Um, and a lot of the redlining is grammar stuff. Hey, you've used this word too many times. Let's swap it out. A lot of little things that make me question if I should speak out loud at all, because I'm like, is that not where a comma goes? Do we not put commas there? It's just basic stuff. So there's that part of the process, which I'm not emotionally invested too much in that side of things. So accepting those changes is really easy for me. But then there's like, hey, this jump makes no sense. And we need you to fill it with something that like makes sense. And then I stare at that for like 3 years. And I'm like, oh gosh, but it makes sense in my head. Like that naturally leads to this. So how do I explain that stepping stone? So that piece I think has been really challenging for me because the book feels written and yet I'm adding all of this stuff to it, all of this structure, all of this segues and stories, and how do you make it feel more relatable and more engaging? And so that part I think is the challenging piece. And then once we get through editing, we go into typesetting. So it gets typed up by how it will look in the book, and all of that gets reviewed again and edited again. And then that goes into printing. So it's like this crazy process that we're living through.
Yeah, completely. And I think taking a step back for listeners too, I find that most leaders do want to produce or write a book or a piece of rich content, whether that's a documentary or something where they take a piece of their wisdom or platform and bring it out to the masses in some way. I think the most terrifying part when I think about this process is actually getting that redlined manuscript back. What, like emotionally, besides just like, oh, like, do I not know grammar? Or how do I like understand my blind spots and fill that in with text in these gaps? Like, what else was going on emotionally at that point?
Yeah, I think it's hard because so I have a wonderful publisher. My editor is like amazing. He's so sweet. And he sends me this really nice email. Hey, book is great. So full of rich content. So I'm like feeling good. And he's like, I made some small edits. Not that much. You'll see most of it's in the first few chapters just to really grab the reader. But overall, really excited. Let me know when you can turn it around. So I'm in my head, I have expectations now of like, I am a great writer and you did nothing. And my book is fabulous. And then I opened the document and I was like, holy, I won't curse on your podcast. There were
Oh,
like,
you can curse.
there were like 57 edits on page one, 57. And I was like, this is not a lot of edits. And like I said, a lot of them were like, you don't need an and here, like get rid of this comma or like delete this word or substitute this word. It was a lot of small stuff, but I was like, ah, oh my gosh. And I think it was very overwhelming because we all like to think we're good at the things we do, right? I've always considered myself a strong writer. I always got really good grades in English classes and writing classes. And to get it back, I did. I sent it to my friend who's the technical writer. And I was like, am I bad?
Is
And
this normal?
she goes, no, this is totally normal. She's like, I've seen way worse. And I was like, you've seen way worse? What did it look like? Because my whole page is red. What does it look like if it's worse? And she's like, none of your words would be there. There would just be other words. And I was like, I don't know if that makes you feel better. So I had like this panic. I reached out to my friend. I was like, is this normal? I had my husband come up and I'm like, and he's like, yeah, that sounds right. And I was like, I don't need your grammar checks. Thank you. But I think there's that emotional piece of like, you have to get out of your own way. And I'm a firm believer that the people who are great in their field are great for a reason. And I'm working with my publisher, my editor, because I believe that they're great at what they do. And so if I trust them to do their jobs, then this is the right approach. So there was a little bit of like denial and grief in the beginning, and then very quickly to acceptance because I was like, they're doing this to make my book as great as possible, to sell as many copies as possible, which is what I want to, and kind of setting that ego aside in order to lean in and really get the book where it needs to be. But the hardest part for me emotionally is where they rewrote sections. So there aren't very many. I would say there's like 4 or 5 throughout the whole book where they like took a paragraph and rewrote it because they didn't like the way I wrote it. And in those sections, it doesn't sound like me to me. And that's been my biggest struggle because I'm like, I see why you did this. It does make sense. I'm following. But to me, this paragraph feels so different than the rest of the book because it doesn't sound like me. And
Right.
letting go of that voice or finding ways to bring that voice back into those sections, I think has been the most challenging from just an ego perspective of like, I want it to be true to me. I'm pretty much what you see is what you get. So I don't want the book to feel like ChatGPT wrote it instead of me. And so that I think has been the hardest for me to kind of navigate is like, hey, I understand why you guys made this change. Could we add this sentence back in, or could we change this phrasing slightly just so it feels more like me, kind of having that balance, knowing where to push and stick my ground versus where to allow the editors to do their job.
Yeah. And you've developed such a strong voice through social. I mean, just like you were saying earlier, like you work on that every single Monday. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you're filming yourself, you're still choosing those words, that narrative, that tone that is the undercurrent. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things I want to dig in here too. I think when you speak about the denial, the grief that comes up, like that's completely normal. But the trust that you have in the editor seems so key. And I think, one day when I do write a book, I definitely want to go the more traditional publishing route because I know and want to trust in a team around me because they know more about publishing than I do. I don't know anything about publishing. I think that's also what we expect as coaches too. When clients show up, it's like we do ask them to put their ego to the side because we're there to point out the things that they can't see, just like they're pointing out things with a red pen
Yep.
that you may not be able to see in the drafting process. So I want to play a little scenario game with you
I'm
that
in.
kind of pulls us out of writing stuff, the writing topic for a bit, but you have so many things happening. And let's say everything is wrapped up with a bow. Like maybe fast forward to next year, 2026 or 2027. Let's say you've published the book and it's great, it's out, you've sold goal amount of copies. Let's say you've won Mrs. Colorado and you've done your reign and it's complete. Let's say you decide, or it happens where the corporate role is done. And let's say that you, as a career coach, that time has come to its final moment and you find your slate completely clean. Now, in this scenario, money is not a thing. You and your
Great.
family are totally fine.
I'm all about it. Let's do it.
And there is no such thing as social or the internet. So, like visibility, that validation from the outside, it doesn't exist. What would you do?
Okay. I already have an answer ready. I would
Of
have
course you do.
a full-time job of hobbies. So I was literally discussing this with my husband on our walk yesterday, not even joking. If money were no object, I can't imagine not being a career coach, just being honest, because even if Mrs. Colorado wrapped up with a bow, even if my career, like my job wrapped up with a bow, even if the book did great, it's so hard to see myself not running my business. But in this world that you're saying, like, hey, it's gone, I'm in. So I want to learn to play the cello. Um, I have a cello. It's right behind this door. I don't know how to play it, but I have it. And I was in the orchestra for like 13 years. I played the upright bass, the really big one, and a bass guitar because I thought that was cool in high school.
That's cool.
And I've always wanted to learn the cello. I would have cello lessons. I have a garden. I'm like obsessed with it. I have 18 pumpkins coming in. If anybody needs
Oh,
pumpkins. I have way too many pumpkins coming in. But I grow like tomatoes and lettuce and uh, potatoes and onions and garlic and strawberries and raspberries and all this stuff. I would learn to can and preserve all of that. I would get freeze dryer. I would be like homestead housewife on that front. I would want to learn to ice skate better. Both of my kids play hockey and they love it, and I can barely stand on skates. I'm going to learn to play. So, what I would do if I had all the money in the world and all the free time, I want to learn all of the things that I want to know how to do that I don't know how to do yet. And for me, that's a lot of like mini passions of my husband and I've talked about if we won the lottery. Like, I want to work in a steakhouse and learn to make the best steak. I want to learn to play the cello. I want to learn to ice skate. I want to learn to garden more effectively. I want to learn to preserve food. I want to learn to sew my own clothes. I have this huge list of like, I want to learn sign language. This is a big passion of mine lately. So my mother is legally deaf. Both of my kids are hard of hearing. And so it's very important to me that we're all going to learn sign language with all of my free time, which means it hasn't happened yet. We would be learning sign language. So I just think for me, I don't see myself ever in a world where I'm like sitting on a beach, sipping Mai Tais, doing nothing all day. I just don't think I have that personality type, but I would fill my life with all my passions. And I
Yeah.
would do it in a way that was inclusive with my family. Like my son is really into jujitsu. I'd love to learn jujitsu. Like, can I do that with him? My daughter's really into ice skating. Can I do ice skating with her? Like, how do I bring my family and my passions and do all these things for us together? For sure, that would be how I would spend all my days. And then I would just die like super knowledgeable about like 5% of everything and be super happy with that. Um, but I think for me, I'm such a, like, I love to learn. I really love to like figure out that next thing. And so that's how I would spend a lot of my time. And that's a very complex answer. You're probably like expecting me to be like, I want to be an interior designer. No, I have like all these hobbies I want to learn 24 hours a day.
No, that's beautiful. I think that is actually more of the common response from anyone who is high achieving, who likes to like enjoys the evolution process. I actually don't think it's normal for humans to want to be on a beach sipping Mai Tais all day. I think there's something going on there if that's all you want to do every day, because the human experience is one where we see change every single moment. Like you take a breath in, you take a breath out. You wake up different than you woke up the day before. So I think it's more just like squeezing out the juice. And what's funny about you mentioning the cello is this last weekend, I was like, I need to do nothing. I need to rest. Like you were saying earlier, I need to completely recharge. Last week was a lot. Every week is a lot. And I started playing with the piano. We have a little keyboard, and it's something that I learned piano when I was younger. I played for about 5 years, but it was nice to tap back into that and play and try something new and develop a skill that you don't need. It's not going to provide any immediate value, but it's just fun and it's something that you can evolve through. So thank you for that piece. I feel like I could talk to you forever. Like, I want to do another episode around the time of Mrs. Colorado because I think that is a whole topic we didn't even tap into. But I do want to start wrapping up the show. So, last question of like the traditional interview series here, but what is one side note or unexpected lesson you discovered across all of these things that you're doing?
Um, Recently, I would say, okay, so I have complicated feelings where AI is concerned. This is my caveat statement, but I've been really leaning into Chat GPT lately in ways that like I would not think about. So I asked Chat GPT how to do my makeup and I like loaded a picture and it gave me like a how to of like how to best optimize my features and then like a list of beauty products that went with that. Or like how should I cut and style my hair for my face shape? Or how should I talk about communicating effectively with this friend where I'm having a difficult situation? This is the situation. How could I communicate that in like a loving, helpful way? And so my obsession right now is ChatGPT because I feel like it's like for somebody who's moving so fast, I don't always take the time to like think about these things. And so I've been leaning into that to kind of help me like soften rough edges or put things through that I need. So my side note right now is that you can use ChatGPT for things other than work and content, which is how I've always used it, is like, help me write a newsletter or like make this newsletter sound better or rewrite this chapter so that my editor won't give me 57 edits on each page. Is how I've always used it. But now I'm really leaning into like other areas of my life where it could be helpful and conducive. So that's my side note.
I love that. That's a really good one. I have one to piggyback that with, and especially for you because you like to get all your words out. And this might give your husband a buffer, but if you do text to speech with ChatGPT and just ramble, like just talk all your thoughts out, basically, and then you can ask it like however you want to go about it. For me, I like saying like, what are my blind spots? Like, what am I not seeing in this narrative? Because I'm typically ranting about something that I need to figure out. But it could just be, hey, give me a reflection or tell me what to do next or just listen to me. And then it might like provide something really interesting. So
I love that.
Yeah, little
Yes,
tip.
and this is the stuff that I'm like, I feel like whoever runs ChatGPT marketing, call them, but also figure out like it's all these different areas where it can like lean in to help you in your life that I'd never really considered. That for me has been like really fun lately. So I will definitely try that, especially when I'm trying to like make a decision or find a next step, because I find that that's where I struggle a lot to understand like I think I know the answer. I always think I know the answer. I am super smart to me. But am I actually thinking about all of the situations and moving forward? So I love that as reflection.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, let's move to our closing piece, our segment, which is called Off the Record. So, Kendall, for Off the Record, we basically chat about products, services that you're loving, as well as things that you have the ick with. So, to start us off, is there like a product or thing, anything, any area of life that you've been obsessed with lately?
Ooh, this is so challenging. You even warned me that you were going to ask me this, and I still am like
No.
not ready. Um,
I can answer first if you want, because I have one.
yeah.
I don't know why, but I recently got a see-through like collared blouse for a costume like a couple months ago. It was for a 90s thing, and I've been obsessed with it. Like I really like the material. It feels very luxurious, but it's light. I don't know. I'm in California too, so that's it's part of it where I want to feel like okay, I'm like buttoned up for work, but I still feel I don't know, fun.
How fun. Okay, I do love that. Okay. So now I have two. I have two because I can't ever have one. So I have a remarkable tablet.
Ooh,
I'm
cool.
obsessed. So it's just paper, is what it is. It's digital paper, but it feels like writing on paper. It doesn't feel like writing on a weird iPad, but it is the only thing that keeps me organized. And I have like a planner in here with like my calendar, and I have all my to-do lists. It's where I keep all my notes. And I find that it is like one of the most helpful pieces in my office as far as like things I love. And I have convinced like five of my friends to buy them because I'm so passionate about it. I love them. So I think that's a good one. And on the clothing front, because you mentioned that shirt, I have been really into corsets lately.
Oh, yes.
And not necessarily in like a boudoir way, though, if that's your vibe, roll with it, but more in a like shapewear layering way for me. So I have more of like a curvy body type. So I have like a tinier waist, but I have more curves up and down. And for me, if I add a corset to something, I instantly feel like I'm just like ready. It's like that next level piece for me. So I have been wearing them a lot more lately. And we were looking for Halloween costumes. And my husband was like, what about something like this? And I was like, well, I already have the corset and the shirt. And he was like, what? And I was like, so yeah, I could be that. I already have all those pieces. And he was like, uh-huh, that's a totally normal thing to throw out in conversation. I was like, but I do. But even like this dress I'm wearing today has like a corset piece in it.
Ooh.
And it's just a vibe for me. So yeah, so I'm into corsets right now.
Okay, between the corsets and the cello and the gardening, I feel like you're like a Victorian woman or like had a,
Vision.
yeah, you have a strong vision, maybe a strong Victorian past life or something.
I love it. I know I always joke I was born in the wrong era, but I don't actually want to be born in any other era. I just want the ability to do those things from that era. And that's the vibe right now. So
Love it. I love
yeah.
it. Well, thank you, Kendall, for being on the show. This was an absolute blast. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So if you want to find me on social media, I am that career coach pretty much on any platform that exists. And if you want to follow more of the personal side, like the Mrs. Colorado and stuff, that is Mrs. Monument on Instagram. And I recently had a video go viral over there. So my follower count jumped, and I've always had like 500 followers. Like my private life is not something that's super interesting. And then all of a sudden, like last week, now I have like 8,000 followers. It's like, where did all you people come
What?
from? Isn't it so
Wait.
cool? So
Okay.
welcome aboard. So that's another option if you want more like personal life stuff.
Wait, let's pause this outro for a second because like, what went viral?
So this girl made a video about how she documented her future self in a way that was like really digestible for her. And you and I have been friends for a while. You know that I struggle with more of the woo woo, like how do I think, like step into my future self and manifesting things. I've always really struggled with that concept because I am such a logical person. But the way she described it, I was like, oh, I could see that being super helpful. Let's do it. So I made a video where I was like, all right, I took her advice. This is what it looks like. And this is what my outcome was. And this is what my plan was. And it got like 2 million views or something cray cray. And so, yeah, so I have like 8,000 people. And I was joking because it's like, you guys don't actually want to follow me. That was like a one-off video. Usually it's more about like my gardening, my nonprofit stuff. It's not about this at all, but welcome aboard. So yeah, so it's a future self video. I'll have to send it to you on Insta, but it was like a random video and somebody messaged me and was like, "How did you get so many followers?" I was like, "Dude, I don't know. I don't know this isn't even like my main Insta. This is like my fun Insta where I just brain dump on a regular basis." So, yeah, that's been exciting.
Well, fun fact, that is also how Mr. Beast went viral.
Is it?
It was early on and he had a couple of future self videos and he scheduled them to go out. So he did one like, okay, in 6 months from now, and then he scheduled it to post at that date. And yeah, he exceeded like all of the future self videos. So
Huh.
TLDR from today's episode, do some future self work because apparently you go viral if so.
Apparently, that's the key. So yeah, it's been interesting. I always feel like for anybody who's listening who's like, I want to be an influencer, I'm sure there are influencers who know what they're doing. I am not one of those. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just like brain dump on the internet and hope people like it and we'll roll with it and see what happens. But it's like the first video that went viral for me on Career Coach had like 4 million views. And I was like, really? This?
Yeah, instant.
Okay.
It's so wild. Okay, well, Kendall, you're an absolute dream. Please go find Kendall at that career coach or Mrs. Monument. You are listening to Side Note. Thank you for being here. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review. It's like a free tip that takes 2 seconds, and we love tips. So
I love tips.
thank you.